"Please don't remove my clothes," the Apache girl pleaded. But the cowboy knew he had to act, and it shook him to his core. Before the story unfolds, remember to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The winter of 1882 had bitten harder than most across the Llano country. The land stretched wide and flat, dotted with live oaks and shallow draws where the rainwater lingered from the last storm. By dusk, sleet fell in icy needles whipped sideways by the northern wind. Kohan Redriver rode along the fence line, scarf-pulled high hat pressed low. He had been out since first light, repairing breaks in the wire checking posts, leaning with age and marking gaps where cattle might wander if left unchecked. Days like this passed steady, endless and safe, a rhythm that soothed old wounds. Kohan was 38, rangy and taciturn. Once he had driven cattle trails far north, but that life ended when his wife and infant son succumbed to fever 3 winters ago. The whispers and pitying glances in town were worse than the emptiness of his cabin. He moved farther out, took line work, and kept to himself. Now his world was fences feed and long rides with only his mare for company as the light dimmed. He guided her toward a flooded draw. Water glinted dark between frozen reeds. That's when he saw her. A figure slumped against the bank, half hidden by brush, stiff with ice. His hand went to his rifle out of habit, but the truth struck him before he could aim. A young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, dressed in deerskin, ripped and soaked through her legs, fringed and ribs darkened by a bullet graze. Bronze-toned skin, long black hair, a braid fallen loose at the end. Kohan knelt, hand near her throat, feeling the faint pulse. Alive. Her eyelids flickered, then opened, sharp, and dark fear radiating from every movement. She gasped and clutched her dress tightly, whispering in broken English through chattering teeth. "Please don't remove my clothes." For a moment, Kohan simply stared at her, feeling the weight of her fear. Memories of his wife clutching a blanket in her fever pressed in helplessness. He could never forget. "I won't," he said quietly, jaw set, voice low. Only what's needed to stop the bleeding. He shrugged off his coat and draped it gently over her. She stared hard, as if expecting a trick, then gave the tiniest nod. Only then did he draw his knife from its sheath. He cut away the ruined seam, no more than necessary eyes focused on the work, not her body. He tore strips from his own shirt, bound the wound snugly, and pulled a wool blanket from his saddle roll to wrap her. Her body sagged against him, half-conscious, skin burning despite the cold. He lifted her carefully into his arms, mounted with her across his chest, and turned toward the line cabin 2 miles away, tucked under a clutch of oaks. 1-room stove inside, shelter from the wind. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, carried her in, and laid her on the rope bed along the wall. She stirred with a groan. He spoke softly. "You're safe here. I'll get the fire going." The cabin smelled of cold ash and raw wood. He knelt by the stove, stacked kindling, coaxed the flame until warmth spread. A pot went on the snowmelt kettle, and strips of cloth ready to boil. He kept his hat on, body turned slightly, giving her privacy. When he checked the bandage again, she fought to keep her eyes open. "More clean cloth," he said, holding one up so she could see. She nodded once, jaw tight. He cleaned and rewrapped the wound slowly, carefully. When he offered laudanum, she shook her head firmly. He didn't push. Outside, the storm rattled the cabin's sleet, slapping the roof. Kohan sat angled toward the door rifle, close fire crackling behind him. He checked her fever each hour, spooned water. When she whispered, covered her when she shifted in pain. She studied his hands more than his face, the careful knots, the orderly tools, the steady movements. That steadiness was what she needed. Kohan's thoughts ground on like a turning stone. He knew nothing of who she was, only that she was an Apache, wounded and frightened. Helping her might bring trouble. Men often hunted when a woman escaped, but leaving her wasn't an option. He told himself he was just keeping her alive until morning, until she was strong enough to choose her own path. Yet as hours passed, and the wind shook the walls, he stayed close. By dawn, her fever eased, her breathing steadied. She woke to the sound of knife against kindling and the smell of cornmeal mush cooking. Kohan kept his back turned, raising his coat as a screen so she could adjust the blanket without shame. She didn't call for water until she was ready. Across the cabin, she studied him, eyes searching. "Ayla," she said, her voice rough. "Kohan Redriver," he answered simply. Nothing more. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It marked the start of a fragile, delicate truce. Two souls stranded in the bitter winter, waiting to see if the cabin could shelter more than one. The gray morning light still clung to the walls when Kohan Redriver set bowls of cornmeal mush on the table. The stove murmured low, pushing warmth across the icy window panes. Ayla Stormwind perched on the edge of the bed, still pale, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes tracked every motion he made, not in fear now, but measuring him, judging what sort of man had taken her in. Without a word, Kohan pulled out a chair for her. She hesitated, legs trembling, then rose slowly. Instinctively, he reached to steady her, but stopped, hands hovering just above her forearms. She glanced at him once, then allowed his grip. Her skin burned with fever, yet her stance remained firm. He released her as soon as she found balance, stepping back with a half nod. They ate without rush. He noticed her caution, lifting the spoon, as if she hadn't eaten in days. The silence carried an unasked question. Why was she here alone, wounded by a bullet? He asked nothing. Still, his mind circled back to the ridge tracks he'd seen all week. 3 riders, not locals. If they were the ones who left her bleeding, they could return. After breakfast, he moved to chores. The water bucket ran low, so he donned his coat and went out to fill it with snow. His mind moved in steady, practiced rhythms. Keep her alive, keep danger away, don't crowd her. Inside, she had lifted his coat across the room, holding it like a curtain while straightening her torn dress beneath. When he returned, he pretended not to notice, setting the bucket on the stove and stirring the pot with the back of his knife, until a careful, accented voice broke the quiet. "Why do you live here?" she asked. He paused before answering. "Fence work. A cattle outfit pays me to ride the line. Cabin's part of the deal." He didn't mention the grave on the hill in town, where silence had been easier than pity. She nodded, as if that brief answer said enough. Her eyes dropped to her lap, fingers tightening around the torn seam of her dress. After a long pause, she spoke again. "Men shot me, wanted to take me. I ran." Her gaze met his, flat and steady. "They'll come again," she said. Kohan felt the weight of her words press down. He showed no reaction, only nodded slowly. "I saw tracks yesterday. 3 riders." He moved to the table, checked the Winchester, and oiled the bolt. His jaw tightened not at her, but at the thought of men hunting a woman like stock. Questions hung in the air. Why her? Why alone? Where was her family? She answered in fragments. "Soldiers pushed my people north, some taken east. I stayed behind. Family gone." Her voice cracked on the last word, yet she didn't look away. He respected that she spoke only what she chose. He didn't ask more. Instead, he revealed the small trap door beneath the bed, a crawl space barely tall enough to lie flat. If they ride here, you can wait below. Her head shook hard. Not hide, not alone. He studied her a moment, then gave a single nod. No argument. Together. The day passed in the rhythm of small labors. He split wood, stacked it by the stove. She swept cinders with a straw broom he had cut. Months back. He stepped out when she bathed behind a blanket strung on a rope, returning to find his coat folded neatly on the chair. She mended the torn seam of her dress with rawhide strips from her pouch, each stitch careful, reclaiming dignity piece by piece. By sundown, a new tension settled. A horse whinnied faintly on the ridge, certain yet distant. Kohan closed the shutter, laid the rifle across his knees, and draped an extra blanket over the window. He didn't speak fear aloud, but every movement spoke it. Ayla noticed. She took the fire poker, sat close to the stove, eyes locked on the latch. Her hands trembled. He slid a tin cup of water across the floor so she could drink without turning. That simple act steadied her more than words could. Hours passed like this. Two strangers bound by silent understanding, waiting on men who had yet to show themselves. The silence wasn't empty now, it carried weight. Almost like a pact. He would not leave her. She would not yield her ground. As the fire burned low and shadows stretched across the cabin, Kohan understood their fight was just beginning. Yet she wasn't a burden. She refused to break, and that made him stand taller than ever. The cabin seemed to hold its breath that night. The only sounds were the low crackle of burning wood and the faint hiss of wind sneaking through the chinking. Kohan Redriver sat at the table, the Winchester resting across his knees, eyes fixed more on the door than the fire. Ayla Stormwind crouched close to the stove, the poker clutched in her hands. Her braid wrapped once around her wrist as if anchoring herself to the world. Both listened taut and silent. The scrape of hooves, the subtle shift of men outside who hadn't yet revealed themselves. Near midnight, the sound came. A horse snorted beyond the tree line, leather creaking softly as saddles moved. Kohan's gut tightened. He had expected it since sundown, but anticipation never dulled the first note of danger. He raised a finger sharp and still signaling her not to move. Her eyes flicked to him, then back to the door. She steadied her grip on the iron poker. The latch rattled once. Then again someone was testing it. Kohan rose slowly, keeping his balance, and called through the door, voice flat and steady. "This place is mine." "Try that again, and you'll lose your hand." Silence followed long enough to wonder if they had left. Then came low laughter, at least 3 voices muffled, but carrying a tone she recognized. Her chest rose hard beneath the blanket. "Them," she whispered. Kohan moved to the window, lifting a corner of the blanket he had hung, and saw shadows moving across the snow. They weren't leaving. He didn't fire, not yet. The warning had to be clear, precise, not wasted. He stepped back, worked the lever on the Winchester, and aimed high through a crack in the shutter. The shot split the night, echoing off the oaks. He had intentionally aimed above their hats. The horses spooked, the men cursed, then hooves pounded back into the trees. They weren't gone. He knew their kind. Men like that circled, waiting for weakness aslip the quiet hours after dark. Not moving, not striking, just waiting. Kohan held the rifle across his knees, head tilted to hear beyond the fire's pop. Ayla sat rigid in her chair, poker, steady eyes locked on the door. When her hands began to tremble, he slid a tin cup along the floor until it touched her knee. She didn't look up, didn't need to. She drank, set it down, and her grip steadied again in that silence. Questions from the first night pressed to the surface. Why had they shot her? Why chase her across frozen country? Kohan asked, plain voice low. Why are they after you? Her answer came steady without apology. They want to trade me. I fought, I ran. Her gaze locked on the latch. Men don't forget when a woman runs. The answer said more than her words. Kohan's jaw set hard. He didn't probe further. He'd lived long enough to know cruelty's shape. He didn't need details. What mattered was the now, the men outside, the woman inside, and his choice to keep her alive. By the time dawn's gray crept through the cracks, the riders were gone. Kohan eased the shutter back, scanning the ridge. Empty. Snow marked their tracks, leading east. He exhaled the breath he had held all night. When he turned, Ayla Stormwind watched him, eyes dark but steady. She reached for his wrist, a brief touch, yet it carried more weight than words. He didn't pull away. His hand shifted, covering hers rough palm over her smaller fingers. No speech, no promise, just the simple truth of being present. Later that morning, he cleaned her wound again, showing her the cloth, first waiting for a nod before he touched her. She didn't flinch. He noticed the way her shoulders dropped slightly, trust building in small degrees. When she rose to her feet and balanced on her own, she surprised him, leaning forward to press her lips to his, once quick and certain. He froze, then returned it carefully, as if fearing to break something fragile. For Kohan, it wasn't passion or possession. It was acknowledgement that through the long night of fear she had chosen to stand beside him, and he had chosen the same. By afternoon, routine returned. He split wood in the yard, eyes scanning the ridge. She sewed by the window needle, flashing through leather, mending what had been torn. Questions from that first night, the fate of her family, whether he would send her away, found their first answers in her words. When he mentioned taking her north to where her people had been driven, she shook her head. No one left. Only me. That truth struck heavier than the rifle across his knees. He said nothing further, only pulled the chair closer to the stove, setting her repaired dress across it to dry. The silence that followed wasn't strained. It marked the beginning of something shared, built on survived fear and choices made side by side. Snow outside had settled into a thin, hard crust by morning, glittering faintly under the pale sun. Kohan stepped out to inspect the tracks cutting across the ridge. The riders had moved east, but he already knew they hadn't gone far. They hadn't gone far, only slipped out of sight. Men like that never quit easily, especially when they believed unfinished business remained. Kohan Redriver rubbed his stiff hand over his neck, mind already mapping the ridge and the tree line, considering where they might circle back from and what measures he could take. Inside, Ayla Stormwind crouched by the stove, her braid loose over her shoulder as she finished stitching the seam of her dress. She glanced up when he returned, eyes sharper than the night before. Questions lingered in her gaze, the ones left hanging after he bound her wound, after the shared silence. They were still there. She didn't press, only sought to understand what kind of man she had come to rely on. "You've fought before?" she said. Kohan leaned the rifle against the wall, snow shaking off his coat. Trail work, cattle towns. He never wanted it, but life had a way of finding him. He hesitated, then added quietly, "Lost my family 3 years back, fever. After that, I stopped looking for trouble. I just keep the fence, keep to myself." It wasn't a confession given lightly, yet her own revelations allowed him to match her past with his. She nodded slowly, as though that explained his silence, his careful movements around her. "You kept me alive last night," she said. her voice flat, deliberate, waiting for recognition. Not for herself. He studied her. The way she gripped the fabric of her dress as if it were more than cloth, the last remnant of her dignity. He offered no grand speech. No one else would. It was truth enough. The day passed in quiet purpose. Kohan worked outside to reinforce the cabin's meager defenses. He moved the water bucket inside stacked wood high by the stove, tested each hinge and latch. He showed her how to brace the chair under the door handle, a trick he'd learned in rough towns. Ayla didn't just watch. She asked questions about the rifle, about how many bullets, what she could do if he fell. He answered without condescension, handing her the lever action to feel its weight. She held it awkwardly, but her eyes stayed hard. For anyone wondering why she hadn't simply fled, why she stayed with a stranger, the answer became clear in the quiet of evening. North was gone. East meant soldiers. West meant men who hunted her. This cabin wasn't just shelter. It was the first place someone had asked permission before touching her. That mattered more than the risk. As dusk pulled the cold close again, Kohan lit only a single lantern and kept the stove low. "They'll try after dark," he said. "That's when men believe the body grows tired." He sat with the rifle across his lap. She positioned herself near the stove poker in hand posture. Straight hours stretching on. The silence pressed heavy, yet it wasn't empty. Every small sound, the snap of the fire, the creak of the roof, pulled their attention toward the door. When her breathing quickened, he spoke low and steady. "They'll come if they're fools. We'll be ready if they are." Past midnight, the crunch of hooves broke the stillness. Shadows moved against the pale snow. Kohan felt the old knot of fear coil in his gut, yet his hands remained steady, thumb brushing the checkering of the rifle stock. He nodded once toward her, not a command, but an acknowledgement. They faced it together. The latch shifted. A voice outside called, low taunting, "Hand her over, Cowboy, and we'll be on our way." Ayla's jaw locked tight. She gripped the poker so hard her knuckles whitened. Kohan's chest burned with the urge to respond, but he stayed calm, refraining from shouting, conserving his breath. He chambered around slowly, the metallic click, carrying through the cabin. His answer was measured, unshaken. The silence stretched long. Boots shuffled, and one man pressed a hand against the door. Kohan raised the rifle, aimed above the imagined heads, and fired. The shot cracked through the night, splintering the topboard. The men cursed, horses screamed, and they scattered into the darkness. He lowered the rifle, but did not relax. He knew this wasn't over. Pride and fear would guide their return. For now, the cabin still stood, and so did the two of them. Ayla exhaled, shoulders shaking once, then steadied. She looked at him not with gratitude, but with recognition of what it meant to fight side by side. For the first time, she spoke clearly. Together. Kohan gave a short nod, the only reply needed. Morning came without a shot fired. The riders had retreated into the trees before dawn, yet Kohan knew better than to believe they were gone for good. At first light rifle slung, he stepped outside, scanning the snow tracks, looping and crisscrossing, marking men undecided whether to strike or vanish. 3 sets again the same as before. Patient hunters waiting for hunger or fear to pry open the cabin door. Inside, Ayla crouched low at the stove, stirring cornmeal mush with a wooden spoon. The sight made him pause. Her blanket wrapped tight braid, pulled, neat face drawn, but steadier than the night he had found her. She had claimed part of the cabin, claimed the task of cooking, and in that small act lay the answer to the question any listener might have asked from the start. Why hadn't she run? The truth was clear. There was nowhere safer than this small cabin with its single stove and a man who always asked before he touched. Kohan Redriver hung his coat set, the Winchester within reach, and sat across from Ayla Stormwind at the table. "They'll be back," he said simply. She didn't flinch. "Then we wait." They ate in silence, but it wasn't the quiet of strangers anymore. It was the hush of two people listening to the same thread outside the same creak of trees, the same warning carried by the wind. The day passed with work shared without fuss. Kohan split wood in the yard, each strike ringing sharply through the frozen air, while Ayla swept the cabin floor and shook the bedding outside. When he returned, she had mended one of his shirts with spare cloth that Mrs. Talbot had once brought him. The stitches were uneven, but strong. She handed it over folded, not looking at him, saying, "You gave your shirt for bandages. Now it's whole again." He took it with a nod, surprised at how much that simple act touched him. He had been used to mending alone, eating alone, speaking to no one for months. Another pair of hands in the cabin shifted the weight of silence into something different, something that made the place feel less like a bunkhouse and more like a home on a wide, late afternoon. He laid out a plan. "We'll take turns through the night. One rests, one watches. They wouldn't risk a charge unless they thought they were asleep." She agreed without hesitation, jaw set, like a soldier given orders. When her turn came, she sat with the rifle across her lap, shoulders squared, despite the fresh scar beneath her dress. He lay on the rope bed boots, still on hat, tilted over his face. Sleep came light broken, but he trusted her to keep watch. When he woke near midnight, she remained stiff in the chair, rifle steady across her knees, eyes heavy. He rose, walked over, and briefly touched her hand. "My turn," she didn't argue, only handed the rifle across. Her fingers brushed his, longer than needed, that touch lingering, even after she lay down and turned her face to the wall. The questions left unanswered from earlier chapters found small answers in these quiet hours. How could two strangers, an Apache woman and a reclusive cowboy, trust each other enough to share guard through the dead of night? The answer wasn't spoken. It was in the rhythm she slept, while he watched. He slept while she guarded, neither doubting the other would hold the line. The Dax Iron Trail. Bren Quickfang, Lon Redclaw, and Varro Firehawk riders were still out there. Cold smoke drifted faintly along the ridgeproof they had camped, rather than moved on. Trouble hadn't passed, it had only paused. Kohan closed the shutter and set the rifle back on the table. Ayla's braid hung loose, her dress patched but still rough at the seams. She caught his eye as she spoke. Voice hoarse, but steady. "I stay here. I don't run if they count my fight." He studied her a long moment, then gave a single nod, not because he agreed with the risk, but because he knew she would accept nothing else. In that nod lay an unspoken truth any listener might have wondered, since the first night, whether Kohan saw her as a burden or as someone worth standing beside. The answer was clear in the way he loaded each cartridge into the Winchester, steady and sure. They were no longer just surviving side by side. They were preparing as if the cabin belonged to both of them. The sixth day broke colder than the rest, a chill that burned lungs with every breath. Kohan stepped into the yard, boots crunching over the hard crust of snow, and saw smoke rising again along the ridge. The men hadn't left. They were circling, waiting, perhaps deciding how much the woman inside was worth to them. The weight of it pressed on his chest. He had seen sieges before, usually in towns, drunk men surrounding a saloon. Out here it was different. No law, no sheriff, Just him, her, and the thin boards of the cabin. When he returned inside, Ayla Stormwind was feeding the fire with small pieces of split wood. She looked at him sharply, searching his face for answers he didn't speak. He gave them anyway. "They're still there," he said. She nodded once, without surprise. "They want me." Her voice was steady, not as a victim, but as someone who refused to be carried like property again. Kohan laid out ammunition in a neat row. His hands moved deliberately slow. They'd try harder tonight. That day they worked as if the cabin were a fort. Kohan dragged extra logs against the walls facing the ridge more for peace of mind than true cover. Ayla boiled strips of cloth, not only for wounds, but to make smoke masks in case the men tried fire. Any question a listener might have had from the start, could she defend herself? Or did she only rely on him, found its answer here? She practiced with the rifle, awkward at first, then steadily better. Her shoulder-braced cheek pressed to the stock breath even. Kohan Redriver corrected her grip once, hand closing lightly over hers, the moment carrying weight beyond the lesson itself. She looked at him, not pulling away until he stepped back. Evening fell, bringing the test. A horse snorted near the trees, then another. Kohan stood by the door rifle ready, while Ayla Stormwind crouched by the shutter with the pistol he had handed her. The men didn't knock this time. They shouted, "Cowboy, hand her over, and maybe we let you walk." His reply was calm, even. "You want her, you'll have to take her through me." The first strike came a boot slammed hard against the doorframe. The wood rattled. Kohan fired through the top plank splinters, flying men staggering back with curses. A pause. Then the crash of a bottle flaming thrown against the cabin wall. Smoke hissed, but the snow smothered most of it before fire could catch. Intent clear. Ayla's breath quickened, yet she didn't freeze. She gripped the pistol tightly, eyes locked on the window. Kohan glanced at her, seeing fear beneath her control, and spoke low. "You're safe. I'm here." The reassurance was for her, steadying her enough to hold her ground. When another shadow darted near the shutter, she fired once. The shot cracked sharp into the dark. A cry answered a confirmation she hadn't missed by much. Her shoulders shook, but she didn't lower the weapon. The fight stretched for long minutes, then hours. Men circled, tested, threw threats against the walls. Kohan answered only when needed, one round at a time, never wasting a shot. The fire inside burned low. The cabin smelled of gunpowder and smoke, yet still stood. By dawn, the ridge was quiet. The tracks told the story. 2 of the men had dragged a wounded companion away, for now the siege was broken. Inside, Kohan set the rifle aside, body sagging from hours of tension. Ayla lowered the pistol hands, trembling only once danger had passed. She looked at him, chest-heaving eyes carrying an unspoken truth. Gratitude, yes, but more than that. She had stood with him, not behind him. She crossed the room, slowly pressed her hand to his chest, whispering, "Together." He laid his rough palm over hers, warmth pressing into her fingers. In that moment, the cabin felt different. Not just a shelter, not just his. The question lingering since the first night, would she leave, when strong enough hung silent between them. Her touch answered without words. That night when they lay down, it wasn't just for sleep. Kohan stayed near, boots on rifle within reach, her shoulder brushing his, neither moving away. Trust had been carved in the dark hours of the siege, and now it held. Morning after the attack was sharp with frost. Smoke from the stove trailed thin through the chimney. Kohan stepped outside, scanning the tree line with rifle over his arm. Snow told the story clear. 3 riders had pulled back, dragging a 4th between them. One was badly wounded, likely hit by Ayla's pistol. That explained why they hadn't pressed harder before dawn. Kohan knew men like that didn't forgive. They would return if pride outweighed fear. Inside, Ayla crouched at the hearth, adding wood. Her face drawn with fatigue, yet eyes alert. She asked nothing, only read his look. He answered anyway. They're not gone for good, but one's hurt. She didn't relax, only set the pot over the flames. Hurt men make crueler choices, she said quietly. He knew she was right. They sat to eat cornmeal again, strips of jerky softened in broth. The routine steadied them both. For the first time since she had woken in his cabin, she asked about his life before. Why do you stay alone, not with Nohi? A listener might have wondered this from the first chapter. Unspoken until now. Kohan rested his spoon eyes on the table. He had had a wife, a boy fever took them. Town became unbearable. Out here work kept the mind straight. Voice flat hands tightening around the tin bowl. Ayla studied him silently, then spoke low. I know. Soldiers scattered my people. Some gone north, some east, maybe dead, I don't know. Only this dress left from my mother. She touched the repaired seam, fingers steady now instead of clutching. That simple detail answered another lingering question, why she had fought so hard for that torn garment when Kohan first found her. It wasn't vanity, it was the last piece of family she carried. The rest of the day was spent repairing what the night had shaken. Kohan Redriver checked the doorframe splintered by boots, reinforcing it with new nails and a plank from the shed. Ayla Stormwind cut cloth into strips, rolling them tight for bandages. They worked with care, every action, a step toward surviving another night. Kohan made a choice. We can't wait for them to decide. If they press again, it'll be harder. He hesitated, then added, But I won't leave you. We hold here. Ayla met his gaze, unblinking. I choose this place too. Not running. That night they shared guard again, but something had shifted. When Kohan handed her the rifle for her turn, their fingers brushed, and neither withdrew. Later, when he dozed in the chair, he woke to find her seated close by, her blanket draped across both their shoulders. She didn't speak, only stayed near, and he didn't move away. The bond between them, fragile at first, had grown visible now. The questions from earlier, whether she trusted him, whether he saw her as a burden, were answered in those wordless hours. They were no longer strangers thrown together by chance. They were two people who had decided each in their own way to stand side by side. Before dawn, the land outside was still and silent. The riders had not yet returned, but the danger had left a permanent mark inside the cabin. When Ayla laid her hand lightly against his arm as the fire crackled low, Kohan covered it with his own, steady and sure. For the first time since the fever years, he let himself think not just of surviving the next day, but of having someone to survive it with. The 8th night came heavy with silence. Snow had stopped 2 days ago, leaving the land bare and brittle under a hard sky. Kohan knew quiet didn't mean safety. It meant the men were plotting. He kept the rifle across his lap. Fire low lamp dimmed, so the cabin looked dark from outside. Ayla sat opposite, blanket drawn, close posture. Straight. She had asked what would happen if the riders got through the door, a question any listener might have carried since the first gunshot. Kohan had answered plainly without flinching. Then I stand in their way, and if I fall, you take the rifle and make sure none of them walk out. She had looked at him long, then nodded. Not because she wanted the burden, but because she understood there was no other truth. Near midnight, the attack came. Hooves hammered through the still night, closer, now reckless with desperation. The door shutter slammed under a shoulder. Kohan was in place, lever cocked, eyes steady. He fired through the top board splinters flying. A cry erupted from outside. Another boot slammed harder. Ayla braced the chair under the latch. Kohan ordered her back, stepping forward. He shoved the table against the door as it buckled under another hit. Shadows shifted at the shutter. A pistol barrel flashed between the cracks. The shot tore a hole in the wall. Kohan returned fire. Silence followed briefly. The men pulled back, circling again. One tried the roof. He heard boots scraping shingles sharp over the wind. He shoved the rifle into Ayla's hands. "Hold the door. Don't let them through." She gripped it face set while he grabbed the pistol and moved to the rafters. A figure dropped halfway before he fired. The man thudded into the snow. Their horses spooked, shouting angry and slurred with fear, but they didn't quit. They circled, firing into the walls to rattle the cabin. Ayla answered once. Her shot cracked through the shutter close enough to make one curse and pull back. She had learned quickly. Kohan watched as she reloaded with shaking but steady hands. The standoff stretched until the faint gray of dawn crept across the cracks. Finally, the riders broke. One led another, dragging their wounded companion. The sound of hooves faded east. Kohan stayed at the door until silence was certain. Only then did he lower the rifle. Inside, smoke and gunpowder filled the air. The table was scarred walls, pocked with holes, yet they still stood. Ayla leaned against the bedpost, rifle loose in her hands. When he looked at her, she managed a breathless nod. "We live." He crossed the room, took the weapon from her, setting it down. His hand lingered over hers, rough palm covering her trembling fingers. Because she had stood with him for a moment, neither moved. Then she reached up, brushing the line of his jaw with her other hand. The closeness wasn't rushed, wasn't forced. She leaned in, pressing her lips to his, slow and deliberate. This wasn't the quick kiss of gratitude after the first siege. This was a choice, clear and deliberate. Kohan Redriver answered with the same restraint he showed in everything else. Firm, steady, a man careful not to take more than what life had given. When they parted, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was belonging. The questions left hanging, since the first nights, the uncertainty of whether she would leave once healed, whether he could open himself again, found their answer here. She had chosen not to run. He had chosen not to let go. That morning, Kohan repaired the door with fresh boards, hands steady despite exhaustion. Ayla Stormwind cooked the last of the cornmeal, setting the bowls on the table without a word. When he sat across from her, their shoulders nearly touched, and neither shifted away. Outside, the land lay still. Danger had been pushed back for now. Inside, the cabin no longer felt his alone. It belonged to both of them. For the first time in a week, the land felt quiet. Kohan rode out at dawn, breath curling in the frozen air, scanning the ridges one last time. Snow told its story. 3 sets of tracks pulling east, no fresh sign of return. The men were gone, pride battered by fear and blood loss. He followed their trail far enough to be certain, then turned back toward the cabin. The tension pressing on his chest for days eased with each hoofbeat homeward. When he pushed the cabin door open, the smell of fresh bread greeted him. Ayla stood at the stove, sleeves rolled braid falling over her shoulder as she pulled a pan of corn cakes from the heat. She looked up, eyes searching his face. Gone, gone, he said simply, leaning the rifle against the wall. For the first time, he meant it fully. Relief showed in her posture, though she didn't smile. Instead, she nodded once, setting the bread on the table. They ate together. Silence no longer carried fear. It carried the weight of decision. After the meal, Kohan stepped outside to chop wood. The question any listener might have carried since the first night pressed on him: what would happen when she healed? Would she ride north, walk east, or leave him to his quiet? He drove the axe into the block again and again. He thought of the empty years since fever had claimed his family, of how the cabin had stood like a tomb until she brought fire and motion into it. Inside, Ayla cleaned the cabin, folding blankets, mending torn shirts, setting her pouch of beads on the shelf he had cleared for her. Each act was small, yet it answered the question as clearly as words. She was not preparing to leave. She was claiming the space. That afternoon, Kohan found her outside, watching the horizon, with the coat he had given her pulled tight. He joined her standing silent for a long while before speaking. "I said I'd ride you where you wanted. Kin friends anywhere." Her eyes stayed on the horizon. No one left. No place waiting. "Only here," she said, steady. "You gave me choice." "I choose this," Kohan said. Something shifted inside him, something buried since the loss of his wife and boy. He nodded once, a man's wordless promise. The days after were no longer about survival, but routine built by both their hands. He split cedar and planed it into a box for her beadwork. She swept cooked, hung-dried herbs by the stove. When he went out to ride the fence, she mended seams or hauled water. The cabin was no longer solitary, but shared. Mrs. Talbot visited once, her eyes sharp as she handed over cloth. She took in the sight of Ayla tending the fire, and Kohan stacking wood silently, then gave a small, knowing nod. "Good to see life in this place again," she said. It was an outside witness neither of them had asked for, but both needed. When the sun stretched gold across the floorboards, Kohan sat carving the cedar box. Ayla sat beside him, sewing a tear in his coat. Their hands brushed on the table, not deliberate, not withdrawn. She looked at him once, then leaned in, pressing her lips to his again, slower this time, deliberate, certain. He returned it without hesitation. This kiss was not about danger past, it was about staying. The final image was simple, yet whole cabin, warmed by the stove, 2 sets of boots by the door, her beadwork tucked into the cedar box he had made. Kohan's grief was no longer the only presence in the room. Ayla's dress repaired dignity, intact choice made. Their hands rested near each other, not needing to hold. Because the decision had already been made, they would not part. The cabin was theirs. The long winter had given them something neither expected: family rebuilt not by blood, but by choice. And when the wind rattled the chinking, they did not tense anymore, they stayed together.